Part 2 of Mackinlay Kantor's Was the Road of Late So Toilsome, from his book Missouri Bittersweet, written in 1969. Mackinlay Kantor was not only the recipient of the Pulitzer Prize for fiction for his novel Andersonville, but he also wrote an autobiography, and his son wrote a biography of him, and so did his grandson. This is Part 2. Ma'am, is there anyone at home, please? Anyone else? Any of the folks? She spoke no word in reply, just battled us with those fierce, shiny eyes. I thought of a black widow spider. Oh, maybe she was a widow. Maybe a spider. Although she wasn't black. The eyes. Her creped mouth opened wider. At last she spoke 2 words. Henry gone, she said. Then again, to make sure that she was understood, Henry gone. And dragging out the end sounds as if guided by some mysterious instinct toward onomatopoeias. Irene whispering, Poor thing, oh, poor little old thing. I made bold to ask just where Henry had gone, where we might find him. Convulsively, the creature turned her head down against her shoulder and flung one bony arm in front of her face. I turned away quickly. Irene was gone ahead of me, but looking back over her shoulder. Come on, she's utterly terrified. We must get out of here and not frighten her any longer. Stubbornly, I insisted on going around to the back of the house, looking this way and that to see whether I might discover Henry or some other relative. In desperation, I called 2 or 3 times. Hello! Hello! Echoes rapped back across the garden patch. Echoes came out of boulders and a bulging cliff. Hello, 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 in quaint, flat voices. I scooted for the car. Irene spoke as we rocked down the trail. I don't think she moved once, although your calling probably frightened her even more. 200 or 300 yards past the shanty. Hey, Reno, do you see what I see? What do you see? Tracks, wagon tracks. They're numerous. This has become a road again. I was so upset by such misery that I didn't realize. Oh, God, she said, and I suppose she's been that way all her life. However long that's been, 60, 80 years? Grim thought. Could be 40 as well. Anyhow, let's give thanks for ruts and tracks. They led us down to another stream, or perhaps the same stream, farther along in its meanderings. Another ford. We bumped through without trouble. Tracks guided us into a bountiful stand of nut trees. We were so encouraged that we were singing. Flowers I leave you on the grass, all the flowers of love and memory, you will find them when you pass. Wouldn't it be wonderful to come here in the fall when all those butternuts and hickory trees are loaded? There's more than even the squirrels can use. Look at the old ones from last year, lying thick among the leaves scattered all over the place. Irene cried, Men ahead! Where? I saw them while you were looking out at the nuts, just beyond that next patch of brush. Honestly, at that moment I was near to being uninterested in any men. The thing which we had just witnessed, our meeting with the shriveled creature on that stoop, kept thinking, what a scene in a novel! Quite some years would elapse before I'd use it, but use it I did, except the specter became a little girl instead of a crone. Men indeed, 6 of them, and a freckled-faced girl 15 or 16 years old, barefoot and dressed in frayed, short-legged, blue overalls. I thought quickly of the runaway figure I'd seen disappearing along a path. 6 men on the youngish side, ranging perhaps from 25 to 40 years in age, assorted as to size and dress. Overalls mostly, torn and sweaty cotton shirts. One was in his undershirt and wearing a pair of obsolete army pants which flapped around the calves of his legs where once they might have been laced. All wore shoes. One had a lever-action .30-30 Winchester in his hands. Another wore a holstered revolver. There was a brand-new, looked like, automatic shotgun leaning against a tree. Several of this party were breaking up clods with shovel blades. spanking the earth down over a 10-foot square area which had been dug up, and where clay soil was now replaced. A couple of pickaxes lay tossed aside. The diggers must have had a hard time getting through that topsoil. I shut off the ignition. The young girl in overalls, she had a sweet face but pale and studded heavily with freckles. She drifted around behind the men, kept her eyes on the ground. I said, "Howdy, everybody." Not one syllable of response. I nodded again. "Good day." In the most casual fashion in the world, the man with the 30-30 strolled forward and put one elbow against the roof of the car, leaning in a manner of assurance or deliberate impertinence, we couldn't tell which. We both admitted later to being very much frightened. Then, when he bent down and smiled and nodded, we felt slightly reassured. His face was thin, tough, sallow. He had shaved that morning, and cut himself too in a couple of places. He wore a narrow, pencil-traced black mustache. I took him to be about my own age. There was inherent mockery in the manner in which he called me sir. "How do you do, sir?" "How do you do, ma'am? Where under the sun do you folks think you're a-going to?" "We thought we were going to Max Creek." "You got an Iowa license plate on your vehicle. What do you want with Max Creek? Got any kin there?" I brought out my map and explained the whole matter, how we had come to be wanderers in remote, roadless woodlands. His companion stood mute behind him. He was the admitted leader and spokesman. "You know, I conclude that you're the first motor vehicle that has ever come this way." He turned to the others. "Max Creek. You gentlemen think they can get there?" There was a mumble. I couldn't tell what was said. The girl still skulked around. Idly, she was switching at her bare feet and ankles with a green basswood water sprout. Every man in the group, with one exception, wore a black felt hat. The one exception was that individualist who had donned the faded military breeches. He had a plaid cap. The cap was bunchy and bulky. It puffed out beyond the contours of the wearer's head. I had such a cap myself in 1917. He was the one who now came forward. I judged him to be in his middle 30s, perhaps the father of the freckled girl, since his face was adorned plentifully with the same pigmentation. In a mildly apologetic voice, "They might get drowned out at Tipton's." There rose a vague murmur of disagreement. "No," said the tall spokesman. "Water ain't very deep at Dorsey Tipton's forward. I'd be more doubtful about them crossings beyondst. Say, over next to Quarthy's." He looked at us again and smiled. "Tell you something, sir. You sure must have been traveling through hog lots and I don't know what all to get as far as you got. But from here on there is a road of sorts. Man wants to take his folks to Max Creek, he can do it. With a team. I'm just not plumb certain about this here car. What do you call it, anyway?" "Chevrolet." "What do you know about that Chevrolet?" "Vance Griffith once had a Chevrolet," announced one of the others, "before he come back to live with his folks." "That's right. I recall his telling of it." The leader spokesman, call him what you will, fellow with sallow face and hairline mustache, he stepped back and bowed almost cordially. "Wish you a good journey." With that, I observed something I hadn't noted before when he was closer to the car and his exhalations were directed over the top. The unmistakable odor of corn whiskey, delivered second-hand but strongly. He had drunk a little more than the others, perhaps. He was comparatively loquacious and kindly disposed to us strangers. We burned with curiosity, longing to inquire about the activity they'd been pursuing with pickaxes and shovels. Yet something warned me not to speak of it. The spokesman took the matter under control in his own manner. He said distinctly, shaking his head, "Poor old mule." I had started the engine in response to what seemed an invitation for us to get out of there. Now I paused and spoke through the open window. Poor old mule? Yep, a white one. He got smitten by lightning and killed deader'n a doornail. Poor old white mule. So we had to lay him away. He broke into quick laughter, and with his free hand jerked his thumb in the direction in which we should be traveling. Jerked his head same way. We stood not upon our going. Irene kept watching the mirror. They're still staring after us, going to watch us out of sight. Poor old mule, I quoted when we were safe amid trees and underbrush. You know what he had reference to, don't you? What do you mean? White Mule, that's one of their names for moonshine whiskey, one of many. Also, that mention of lightning was appropriate as well. You mean to say that they bury whiskey in the woods? An aging process was involved, and from what I had read of the region and the little I already knew of it, I was aware that when moonshiners wished to age a batch of their product, they didn't bury it anywhere in the area adjacent to their still, took it away off somewhere else. The law might find the still, but not its product. These 6 wise men had chosen a good spot. It was right along the main traveled route, but one good rain would smooth the clay and furrow it, wash a little off the surface. Stones and forest rubbish scattered. No indication that there'd been any digging at all. At last, I felt like telling Irene about that vanishing figure far down the path when I was out exploring an hour before. She probably watched us when we stopped in those woods and I got out to look for the trail. Then she took off. So they were warned of our coming. I'm mighty glad that you were with me. If I'd driven down here with, say, Don Murphy or Tom Duncan, we'd probably have heard a few bullets whining over our heads as a gentle warning. But I doubt that revenue officers bring little blondes along. Irene's voice was tender. Do you suppose one of those men was Henry? She was thinking of that crippled pixie on the stoop of the faded house yonder. More creeks, more crossings. In one of them, at the deepest part, we heard an ominous crunching. I halted for a moment, then realized that we might bog down entirely. Wheels spun, roaring, then we were out. I looked under the car. Everything seemed all right, but that was a close one. We started up another hillside. Here were 2 small figures frozen as statues in front of a tangle of blackberry vines. The little boy was about 9, the girl perhaps 6. Their clothing was worn out, but had been painstakingly mended in places. They were clean. The little boy's hair, we could see it under the rim of his flat felt hat, had been trimmed by loving scissors and neatly. Each of the children held a tin pail well filled with berries. But possession of these good things did nothing to ease the stark amazement and dread with which these berry pickers regarded our approach. We paused, engine still running. The girl shrank completely behind her brother and refused to even peer out again. The boy's pail shook in his hand. We spoke in the most friendly accents we could muster. Have you been picking a lot of berries? His lips were shivering. No. Is this your little sister with you? No. We drove on up the hill. Both youngsters had taken to the brush the moment I put the car into gear. I lost track of the number of stream crossings, but Irene said that she'd kept careful count. Already we'd forded 11 times, including the causeway near Cross Timbers. We had been roving these ravines and ridges for 5 hours. It seemed like a week. How many miles have we traveled? 16. At least the farther we go, the more this road appears to have been used. It's very easy to follow. Lady Macbeth, I said, is that a dagger that I see before me? I mean, another ford? Everything went well until we were almost at the opposite shore. Then a terrific thump underneath. The car lurched. We'd struck a rock. I stopped, but water began to push ominously against the wheels, and we were settling lower. The motor was still running. It hadn't been drowned out. I kicked the accelerator, and in seconds we were free of the stream, high but not dry on the bank beyond. There sounded portentous banging and clanking.